Forget everything you think you know about fixing your life. Managing pain, positive thinking, journaling, the spiritual, bypassing it's all based on a fundamental lie that keeps you trapped in the cycle of seeking. The people who stop suffering don't just manage their chronic pain or anxiety, they dissolve it at the source. They discovered a single truth so catastrophic to the ego, so deeply rooted in the mechanism of perception, that it's the last piece of wisdom they ever needed. Carl Jung, the 20th century's greatest cartographer of the soul, spent his entire life trying to articulate this single idea. He wrote thousands of pages, treated countless patients, descended into his own psychological hell all to communicate something that takes less than 10 seconds to say. It is the missing piece that explains why you keep repeating the same relationship cycles, the same career obstacles, the same inexplicable sense that happiness is always just out of reach. Until you recognize this fundamental error, you will never have free will. You will call your cycles of pain fate. Here is the secret. You have never experienced reality. Not once. Not for a single moment of your entire life. What you call the objective world, the people who trigger you, the situations you encounter is not happening to you. It's happening through you. Your brain is not a camera passively receiving the world. It is a projector continuously generating it. Neuroscience calls this predictive processing. Your consciousness doesn't process reality. It processes a continuous stream of predictions based on past trauma, unresolved bias, and deeply buried internal conflicts. Jung called this your psychic reality, and he believed it was more real than the external physical world. Your unconscious mind, your shadow, your complexes, your repressed desires sits between you and existence like an invisible film reel. You think you're watching life unfold. You are actually watching a movie your psyche is constantly screening. And here is the deeply uncomfortable part: you are not just the audience. You are the director, the screenwriter, the casting agent. You chose the actors. You wrote the scenes of betrayal and abandonment. You sat down in the theater of your own creation and forgot you were the one holding the remote. Think about this scientifically. You have never touched raw reality. Your brain, through a mechanism known as predictive processing, doesn't receive the world, it continuously predicts it. It takes noisy, chaotic sensory data and matches it against pre-existing internal models, your stored memories, biases, and, crucially, your complexes. Reality is merely the most satisfying prediction your brain can make at any given moment. This internal script is largely generated by the default mode network, or DMN. The DMN is the neural hardware of the ego. It's the circuitry responsible for generating your self-narrative, the continuous mental chatter of who you were, what you regret, and what you need to fear about the future. When you identify with the ego, the character suffering in the film, you are identifying with the ceaseless, filtered output of the DMN. This explains the paradox of separate realities. Two people can witness the exact same objective event, a minor market downturn, a colleague's passive comment, and walk away with completely different realities. Not just different opinions, but chemically and psychologically distinct experiences. One sees betrayal and threat, triggering an immediate cortisol spike. The other sees opportunity or benign neglect. Same event, different internal films. Why? Because they are not seeing the event. They are seeing their own stored narratives, their own unresolved complexes, projected outward and reflected back. You stop fighting the screen, the external reality, when you recognize that the source of the conflict, the film projector, is located entirely within your own skull. Here is the key mechanism driving your life's patterns. The unconscious cannot keep secrets. It is fundamentally an engine of self-expression. Everything you reject, deny, or repress must, by necessity, find a way to manifest. Because it cannot speak directly to the conscious mind. The ego's sensor is too strong, it speaks through projection. Evolutionary psychology tells us why this mechanism exists. Projection is a survival tool, now rendered obsolete and toxic. In the ancestral environment, maintaining a positive self-concept, a strong ego, was critical for securing social status, resources, and mating opportunities. Self-deception, the hiding of undesirable traits, the shadow, helped us present a successful front. When we denied our anger, our weakness, or our envy, the brain had to shunt it somewhere. It threw that rejected material, the shadow, out into the external world. Blaming the external group, or the rival tribe, was a neurologically efficient mechanism to maintain social coherence and psychological stability within the self. Projection saved energy by allowing you to preserve your idealized self-image, but that mechanism is now catastrophically flawed. Jung identified 3 primary projections that define almost every human suffering. The first is the shadow. The shadow is everything you are, but refuse to admit. The laziness you condemn in your company worker, the aggression you despise in a political rival, the excessive jealousy you judge in your friend. Where does this rejected energy go? It goes on to specific people, specific groups, or specific public figures. That person who triggers you with inexplicable intensity, the one you think about negatively long after the interaction is over, they are carrying your rejected darkness. They are wearing your denied face. Every time you encounter a trigger, which is often the reflection of your own projection, your body reacts not to the external stimulus, but to the internal threat perceived by the DMN. This reaction is physical, a surge of cortisol and norepinephrine. This immediate stress response is designed for physical threat, but here it is deployed against your own reflection. This creates the self-perpetuating loop of suffering. You project the shadow A, the external world reflects it back B, you react with fear, hatred, or irritation, releasing stress hormones as C. This stress reinforces the DMN's predictive model that the world is hostile D, making you more likely to project the shadow and see hostility again. This repetition is what you call fate. The second projection is the anima, or animus, the contrasexual soul image. This explains the overwhelming, catastrophic force of romantic obsession. When you fall completely, instantly in love, you are not seeing the person standing before you. You are seeing your own unlived potential, your soul's blueprint for completion, projected onto their form. They become a screen for everything you lack: your courage, your tenderness, your lost sense of wonder. This is why the intense, obsessive relationship almost always crashes into bitter disappointment. The projection eventually falls away, and you are left facing an actual, complex human being. The person you were obsessed with never existed. Only your projection was ever there. They were never meant to be a person. They were only meant to be a mirror. The third, and perhaps most destructive projection, involves the complexes. A complex is not merely a memory. It is an autonomous psychic entity, a psychological knot formed by unprocessed emotional energy, usually originating in early life trauma. It acts like a virus in your operating system, with its own agenda, its own triggers, and its own way of hijacking your behavior. The crucial truth about complexes is this: complexes create situations. The abandonment complex does not simply fear abandonment. It manufactures scenarios of abandonment. The unworthiness complex has constructs circumstances that prove its unworthiness, drawing you into relationships or careers that confirm the internal, unconscious belief. Jung documented cases where external lives were precise mirrors of internal psychological knots. Consider the patient who came to him, convinced that everyone in her life, her husband, her colleagues, even strangers, was trying to control her. She felt surrounded by puppet masters, constantly having her boundaries violated. Through deep analysis, Jung helped her track the projection back to the source. The controller was not outside. She carried a massive, unacknowledged need for domination and control that she had repressed completely, deeming it unacceptable. Because the ego refused to integrate this aggressive power drive, the unconscious had to project it onto the nearest available screens. Here is the profound shift when she finally accepted and integrated this shadow, admitted to herself, "Yes, I desire control and power." The external controllers vanished. Not because the people changed their behavior, but because she stopped projecting the film onto them. She withdrew the required energy from the projection, and the characters disappeared from the screen of her reality. This is the collective tragedy. Most human conflict is people fighting with their own reflections. Wars are mass shadow projections. Political hatred is the collective expulsion of our denied weaknesses and anxieties onto an outgroup. You cannot hate something in another person that does not already exist, in some form, within you. Once you recognize this mechanic, the projector, the screen, the projection, you can never participate in the same old drama again. This brings us to the most terrifying and liberating insight Jung ever articulated, the central axiom of psychological freedom. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What you call destiny, bad luck, or the universe testing you, is overwhelmingly an internal script being acted out. That relationship pattern you keep repeating, "You're not unlucky in love." Your unconscious is casting the same toxic role with 5 different actors until you finally recognize the message. That career obstacle that keeps appearing in different forms, not an unfair universe, but your psyche constructing the same necessary lesson in different costumes. The DMN, driven by the complex, seeks predictive confirmation. It will aggressively filter reality and influence your behavior to ensure the internal script, the drama of abandonment or rejection, gets played out. This repetitive suffering is amplified by modern living. Your brain is running ancestral survival software, designed for 150 people in a tribal context in a hyper-connected, hyper-informational environment. The sheer volume of psychological material to repress and project creates an overload. The ancient coping mechanism is now causing mental illness and societal polarization. Consider the woman who married 5 times. 5 different men, 5 different backgrounds, yet all 5 marriages ended in the exact same betrayal and abandonment. She was convinced she was cosmically cursed. Some external, malign force was sabotaging her happiness. Jung showed her the truth. There were never 5 different men. There was one repetitive, internal pattern wearing 5 different masks. Her unconscious was directing the same film over and over, casting different actors in the same role, creating the same tragic ending, because a part of her needed that drama to become conscious. When she stopped blaming the 5 husbands and started examining the one constant, herself, the pattern shattered. The suffering dissolved. Not because she forced a change in her external world, but because consciousness itself entered the drama and deactivated the unconscious program. This is the definition of psychological freedom. You are a puppet of patterns you can't see. But the moment you become conscious of the director, you are no longer subject to the destiny it creates. Consciousness itself is the liberating force. Not effort. Not willpower. Awareness. Here is what this means practically. The reason every problem you've ever had feels like the same problem in a different disguise is because, biologically, it is. Your brain, in its constant drive for efficiency, is not seeking truth, it is seeking pattern confirmation. Your psyche prefers the painful comfort of a predictable pattern, a known loop of suffering over the energy required to construct a completely new reality. The unconscious repetition of complexes is not bad luck. It is optimized brain function gone awry. Neuroscientists call this predictive processing. Your brain doesn't experience the raw world. It constantly generates predictive models based on past traumas and unresolved material. The complex, the psychological knot, acts as a faulty prediction model, perpetually prioritizing old data over present reality. The unconscious is not your enemy. It is a messenger. If you refuse to integrate its material, if you ignore the whisper of the complex or the hint of the projection, it has to escalate. It has to get louder. The hints become loud shouts. The nudges become full-blown crises. What we call mental illness, anxiety, or breakdown is often the psyche screaming because its whispers were silenced. It is the unconscious material demanding to be seen after years of being repressed, minimized, or projected onto the exterior world. It forces a confrontation, and in the modern world, this pressure is amplified to an unbearable degree. Welcome to Phase 3, the modern crisis. The environment we currently inhabit is structurally engineered to prevent the integration of the unconscious and to maximize the power of the ego. We now live inside the digital Skinner box, a technological apparatus designed to exploit your inherent need for external validation and identity confirmation. The currency of the modern world is not money, it is ego maintenance. Social media platforms are the world's most efficient projection factories. They demand that you exhibit a flawless, perpetually positive ego, a curated self that has no shadow, no pain, and no flaws. But where does the denied material go? The more perfect the ego you broadcast, the larger the shadow you accumulate internally. The gap between your projected self and your actual self becomes a chasm, generating existential anxiety and a profound sense of fraudulence. This modern environment doesn't just encourage projection. It forces the paradox of choice onto your identity. You are given infinite options for who you could be, leading to paralyzing indecision about who you are. This anxiety fuels the complexes, and the shadow finds its favorite release valve in digital confrontation. Rage in the comment section. Political polarization. Anonymous hatred. When we attack strangers online, we are not seeing people, we are projecting our massive, unintegrated collective shadow onto convenient, disposable screens. Wars, political conflicts, and online toxicity are simply the collective acting out of the same drama that plagued Jung's patients, fighting the reflection in the mirror, while believing the enemy is outside the glass. The intensity of your hatred for an external group is a precise measure of the shadow you deny within yourself. Why is this happening now? We must integrate evolutionary psychology. Our brains were not designed for this. Our ancestral wiring was optimized for managing social groups of about 150 individuals, Dunbar's number. Our projection mechanism was a finely tuned social survival tool. Today, the average person processes millions of faces, opinions, and narratives daily. This is cognitive overload. The projection system, designed for a small tribe, becomes grossly overwhelmed and malfunctions, dumping massive amounts of unprocessed psychological material onto the global stage. The pain you feel is not a personal failure. It is the inevitable outcome of a psychological mismatch theory. Your ancient psyche is attempting to survive in an environment that actively penalizes introspection and rewards superficial ego display. Jung recognized that the solution could not be found in changing the external world, the screen, but in performing the greatest psychological act of defiance, the identity shift. We must transition from the ego, the character enduring the drama, to the self, the silent witness. From a neuroscientific perspective, the ego is synonymous with the default mode network DMN. The DMN is the neural hardware responsible for generating your constant self-narrative, rehashing the past, worrying about the future, and maintaining the feeling of I. When you identify with the ego, you are identifying with the DMN's constant monologue. You are the suffering character trapped in the psychological simulation. Every trigger, every complex, every projection is a hijacking of the DMN. The self, the witness, the observer is the state achieved when the DMN's compulsive narrative engine is recognized, but not followed. It is the awareness that exists prior to thought, prior to emotion, prior to the story of I. When you shift identification, you are no longer the one drowning in the waves. You become the ocean in which the drowning happens. You are no longer the thought. You are the space in which the thought arises and dissolves. You are the field of awareness. This is the difference between saying, I am anxious, and the liberating observation, I notice anxiety arising within the field of my awareness. That subtle linguistic shift reflects a massive psychological transformation from being the controlled to being the witness. Consciousness itself is the philosopher's stone. It is the direct, unflinching awareness that transforms the dense lead of unconscious complexes into the gold of integrated knowledge. You do not solve the problem. You dissolve it by bringing light to the darkness. A complex only has power when it is unconscious. A projection only works when you don't know it's a projection. The moment you recognize, there is my rejection complex running the show, or I am projecting my own hidden greed onto that person, the power dynamic instantly reverses. The complex does not instantly vanish, but its hold loosens. It ceases to possess you. You withdraw the energy you were investing in the external drama and reinvest it in internal observation. This act of withdrawal is the definition of psychological freedom. The search begins to end when you realize you have been looking for the clockmaker outside the clock. Every external search is misdirected. The guru you seek, the missing piece, the answer you hunt in books and videos, it has always been waiting within. When a teacher seems to speak directly to your soul, you are not receiving wisdom from an external source. You are projecting your own inner wisdom onto them, so that you can finally hear it. The teacher is merely a high-definition mirror. The wisdom is always yours. This is the profound mechanism of transference. The journey of individuation, Jung's term for psychological wholeness, is not about becoming something new. It is the radical act of becoming what you already are. Individuation is the process of removing the masks, dissolving the false selves, and recognizing the untouched, untainted awareness that remains. It is recognizing, not achieving. So, here is the practice that ends the search. Stop asking what's wrong with me. Start asking, what is my unconscious trying to show me through this repetition? That relentless pattern, you can't break the feeling of always being betrayed, always being rejected, always being unlucky. It is not an obstacle. It is your growth disguised as an obstacle. It is communication. The crisis is the messenger. The discomfort is the attention signal. If you were perfectly comfortable in your sleep, why would you ever wake up? The pain is the friction required for the psychological shift to occur. The final paradox closes the loop. You are the seeker, and you are the sought. You are the one searching for the truth, and you are the truth that has been waiting to be found. When this truth lands, truly lands, not in your intellect, but in your bones, the entire search machine grinds to a halt. Not because you found the ultimate external answer, but because you recognized the answer was never external to begin with. The projector has always been within you. The screen has always been within you. The audience, the director, the entire theater, all contained within your own awareness. And the one who realizes this profound truth is also you. The deepest you. The self who was never lost, never seeking, never suffering. The witness that remains when all the ego's dramas finally end. You are not broken. You never were. You are simply dreaming that you are broken. And the dream has felt very real. Your only task is to wake up, not to a cosmic truth out there, but to the self that dreams the dream. This is what Jung spent his life pointing toward. This is what every crisis, every pattern, and every projection has been trying to tell you. You are the answer. And that recognition changes everything. The ultimate implication of Jung's work, reinforced by modern neuroscience, is this: the freedom you crave is not a destination you reach by external effort, but a state of being you recognize by internal withdrawal. Your suffering is not a moral failing. It is a psychological demand. It is the raw, unintegrated material of your unconscious insisting on becoming conscious. When the abandonment complex is seen, it stops being fate. When the shadow projection is recognized, the war ends. You don't eliminate the material, you transform your relationship to it. This is the definition of psychological alchemy, turning the lead of your complexes into the gold of self-knowledge. And that shift, from being possessed by the storm to witnessing the storm, is the only meaningful choice you have ever been offered. When you stop identifying with the ego, the fragile character created by the default mode network DMN, you cease to be susceptible to its drama. The DMN, which spins the self-narrative of suffering, loses power the moment you activate the silent, unwavering observation of the self. This is the difference between living in a psychological simulation and living in pristine awareness. The secret to ending the search is realizing you are the screen on which the search is played, and the screen itself is always perfect, whole, and untouched. The ego will resist this. It is designed, through evolutionary psychology, to fight for its survival, even if its survival means your suffering. Your mind will try to file this insight away as just another idea. This is the final and most insidious projection, projecting the source of truth outside of yourself, even as you hear it echoed internally. The work, therefore, is not over. The journey of individuation, becoming the unified self, is the continuous, conscious commitment to recalling those projections and integrating the shadow they contain. If this profound recognition has landed not in your intellect, but in your bones, then you are ready to move beyond seeking content and into committing to consciousness. You have turned the lens inward, and now the real work begins maintaining the focus. We call this the Conscious Witness Project. This channel is specifically engineered not to provide fleeting motivation, but to offer the advanced psychological architecture required to stabilize the self and permanently dismantle the structures of the unconscious ego. If you are ready to stop calling your repeated patterns fate and start integrating the material they demand, subscribe now. By engaging with this community, you are consciously choosing to stabilize the witness within yourself, transforming the pursuit of happiness into the recognition of wholeness. Don't watch another video in the hope of finding an external answer. Watch the next video with the intention of recognizing the truth that is already residing within you. The final instruction is the only one that matters when the world projects its drama. Close your eyes, find the quiet space, and simply observe. You are not the character. You are the screen. You were never broken. You are the eternal awareness watching the dream. Welcome home.